Good evening. We are pleased to have with us this evening Dr. Robert Klitzman, Professor of Psychiatry at the College of Physicians and Surgeons and the Joseph Mailman School of Public Health. Dr. Klitzman is also the director of the online and in-person Bioethics Master's and Certificate programs at Columbia University, and he co-founded and for 5 years co-directed the Center for Bioethics, and for 10 years directed the Ethics and Policy Core of the HIV Center. Dr. Klitzman has been widely cited as an authority on critical issues concerning genetic testing and discrimination, medical privacy, stem cell research, death and dying, as well as spirituality and medicine. His research on the experiences of physicians when they become patients has shed important light on ways of improving doctor-patient relationships, which is addressed in his book, When Doctors Become Patients. Dr. Klitzman has written 9 books and over 140 articles, drawing on multidisciplinary methods to examine ethical, psychological, and social issues in a variety of contexts in medicine and psychiatry. His book, The Ethics Police: The Struggle to Make Human Research Safe, explores the challenges faced by international review boards. Some of his other books include Designing Babies: How Technology is Changing How We Have Children, Confronting Fate and Family Secrets in the Age of Genetic Testing, Mortal Secrets: Truth and Lies in the Age of AIDS, Am I My Genes? Confronting Fate and Family Secrets in the Age of Genetic Testing. Dr. Klitzman has received numerous awards for his work, including fellowships from the Guggenheim and other foundations. He is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a regular contributor to the New York Times and CNN. We are honored to have with us this evening Dr. Klitzman to discuss what is bioethics and why is it important today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Klitzman.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming. Shukrun. It's been wonderful being here. I was honored to be invited to the King Hussein Cancer Center to speak, and very grateful to them for hosting me, and also to Hanya and her staff here at the Columbia Center. This is the topic, as said, and we just switch this here one moment. Okay, so, and I think if I do the pointer, no, maybe I better do this, okay. Okay, so what is bioethics? Bioethics is the field that examines the ethical, legal, and social implications of advances in biotechnology and biomedicine. And I'll be talking about these in a moment, what this means. And these issues are increasingly arising all across the globe, including here in Jordan, elsewhere in the Arab world, etc. And bioethics really sits at the intersection of issues of law, society, philosophy, medicine, of course, public health, economics, religion, history. It's very interdisciplinary. And there are complex issues that arise in both research settings, when drug companies do studies, when doctors want to find out what is the best treatment for a particular condition, but also in clinical settings, when doctors see patients one-on-one, and also for a system of public health. How should we design a hospital, a healthcare system, if we have so much money? What should be the priorities? And these issues are increasingly fueled. Challenges are coming up because of increasing globalization. So there are patients from Jordan who come to New York. There are patients from all over the world who come to Jordan. There are refugees who cross borders. I don't need to tell you all that. Most drugs that we in America take are made in India, for instance. The telephones that we have in all our pockets are not made in the United States. They're made in China and India. So we live in a very globalized world. We have more biotechnology. And there are also increasing disparities in the world within the United States between the haves and the have-nots, but also every other country and between countries. And these are issues of justice that are of concern to us. And recently, of course, we have increases in use of genetic testing. We now can have genetic testing on all of us. We can have genetic testing done on babies, on fetuses, on embryos, on people who have already died. We have the United States, 23andMe, whereby many people arrange to get genetic testing on their own. And in the United States and in many countries, at some point in the future, 10 years, 20 years, when you go to your doctor will have your whole genome on his or her laptop and could say, do you want to know if you have a gene for breast cancer? I'll press this button. Do you want to know if you have a gene associated with Alzheimer's disease? If you do, I can press that button. So this is a lot of information about all of us that is going to be available, and that raises ethical questions. Questions, what does it mean? Is DNA your destiny? As mentioned, I wrote a book called Am I My Genes? Confronting Fate and Family Secrets in the Age of Genetic Testing. I spoke about this at KHCC just this past week. But there are issues about artificial intelligence that is increasingly being used in healthcare. We now have artificial intelligence programs, algorithms that can read an X-ray just as well as a radiologist. And at some point, the AI algorithm will tell your doctor that you should take this drug at this dose. And the person next to you, the algorithm will say, take that drug at that dose. And the question is that okay? What if the algorithm's wrong? Whose responsibility is it? Is it the doctor? Is it the company that made the algorithm? If the doctor says, look, I may be wrong, but this is what the algorithm says, and you do it, and let's say someone dies as a result. If the doctor said, look, I may be wrong, this is what the algorithm says, but you agree to follow the algorithm, maybe you're responsible. These are questions that are very important. And then there's the future of babies. As mentioned, I just wrote a book 3 months ago. It was published called Designing Babies, How Technology is Changing the Ways We Create Children. And there's a lot of money in biotechnology and healthcare, and that could lead to distortion of what we do. It can lead to drug companies, for instance, or others saying, well, what's most important to me is not the health of my patients, it's making a profit for me. And how do we regulate that to make sure that the interests and the best interests of patients is still paid attention to? Now, you could say, why do we need bioethics? Why don't we just have laws? Well, if you look historically at laws that exist, they have tended not to look at bioethical issues because these are new technologies. Genetics is a new technology. It was only less than 20 years ago that we first sequenced someone's genome. The first written down set of laws for any country anywhere on earth was here in the Middle East. It was the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon. It consisted of roughly 282 laws saying things, for instance, if anyone steal the property of a temple or of a court, he shall be put to death, and also the one who receives the stolen thing from him shall be put to death. Similarly, number 8 of 282, if anyone steal cattle or sheep or an ass or a pig or a goat, if it belongs to a god or the court, the thief shall pay 30-fold thereof, etc., etc. So again, this was an early attempt to say what you should do and what you shouldn't do. This is the first on earth, the first written code of moral behavior. It doesn't talk about should you get genetic testing done. It doesn't talk about if I know your genetic test, should I tell anyone, who should I tell? It doesn't answer bioethical issues that we now face. Similarly, the 10 Commandments, this is Moses and the 10 Commandments. Here are the 10 Commandments. You shall not have strange gods. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. You shall not kill. You shall not steal. You shall not commit adultery. All very good. It doesn't say, when should I pull the plug on a patient who's being kept alive with machines? It doesn't say, if we have coronavirus in China, should we prevent any Chinese person from coming to our country? Should we say that anyone from China should stay in China? Should we say that anyone from our country who wants to go to Singapore shouldn't go? How do we make these decisions, etc.? Now, so we had laws and religious precepts that could shape some of what we do. The notion that there's good or bad is there, and certainly I should say there is the Hippocratic Oath. And in medieval Arab medicine, there were also great physicians who also developed a body of moral thought about medicine. But modern bioethics, in some ways, unfortunately, starts with the Nazis and with Auschwitz. And in Nazi Germany, in concentration camps, the Nazis performed terrible experiments on people. So the Nazis, for instance, wanted to see how long their troops would survive on the Eastern Front. So they took people before they died of cold. So they took people in concentration camps, they put them in the snow, and measured how long it took for them to die. So there was no informed consent. They wanted to see other things as well, how to reattach limbs for soldiers, so they would take off people's limbs in concentration camps. They'd try to sew them back. It didn't work. So after this, there was the Nuremberg Code, which is the first attempt in bioethics to come up with a set of moral principles, since it wasn't addressed in the Ten Commandments and the Code of Hammurabi, etc. So it said informed consent is absolutely essential. Qualified researchers need to use appropriate research designs. There needs to be a favorable risk-benefit ratio. Participants must be free to stop at any time. The code does not address clinical research in patients with illness. So this was a good code. But the problem is that this is from 1948, and there have been many, many drug scandals since then, many, many scandals in research since then. And of course, this doesn't answer exactly what do you do with genetic information. Let's say I've had patients who say, I have the gene for breast cancer. I don't want to tell my sister. I don't like my sister. Or I don't want to tell my mother. It'll upset her. Or I don't want to tell my daughter, she's 21, she's 22, it'll upset her. So how do we deal with these kinds of issues? So even though we had this code, even in the United States, there have been scandals. So there was the Tuskegee syphilis study that was led by Dr. Clark here that looked at poor African-American men who were sharecroppers. They were poor farmers who did not own the land in Alabama, and they were semi-literate. And the purpose of the study was to see the natural course of syphilis. So these men had syphilis, and the study was to see how long it took for the syphilis to infect their brain, for instance, how long for them to die. The problem was that when penicillin became available after World War II as a definitive cure for syphilis, if you take penicillin, you get rid of the syphilis. The researchers in the US government and Johns Hopkins University and other universities, not Columbia, said, we're not going to give the men penicillin, and we're not even going to tell the men it exists, because it would end the experiment. It would destroy the experiment. If the men got better and no longer had syphilis, we couldn't see what the natural course of the syphilis was. So this is even though the Nuremberg Code said you need informed consent, here nobody cared. Everyone thought, well, it's going to hurt our experiment. This is the nurse who was involved, who was stuck in the middle. She was African-American. She wasn't sure what to do. So as a result of that, following the Tuskegee syphilis study, the U.S. government for the first time came up with a set of bioethical principles. So we had the Nuremberg Tribunal in Germany, and now we had the U.S. government saying that we're going to have a National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. That's a mouthful, to establish basic ethical principles for the conduct of human research, develop guidelines. And they came up with something called the Belmont Report, which was named because it took place outside of Washington, D.C. in the Belmont Conference Center. And they came up with basic ethical principles, boundaries between clinical practice and research, basic ethical principles and applications. And they said there's three, we now say there are four ethical principles. There's autonomy. We believe in respecting the rights of the individual and letting people make choices for themselves. So if I'm your doctor, I can't say, I'm going to inject you with this thing because I think it's going to help you. If you say no, ordinarily, I can't just say, well, that's tough, I'm going to inject it anyway, right? We respect you to make your decisions. Secondly is beneficence. We want to do what's in the patient's best interests. We want to avoid harm, which is non-maleficence, and we believe in justice. But there are questions. These are principles everyone would agree. No one would say, no, I don't believe in justice. I don't believe in respecting people. No one's going to say that. But there are challenges that come up that make the work of bioethicists and research ethics committees at hospitals challenging. So whose autonomy? What if a sister doesn't want to donate a kidney to a brother for whom she's a match? Should we take the kidney? Should we pressure her? Should we say fine? What if the parent of an unborn child uses an anonymous sperm donor? Let's say the couple can't have children, they use an anonymous sperm donor, but they don't ever want to tell the child that they use an anonymous sperm donor. So the child will never know who his or her real biologic genetic father is. Is that okay? Right now we say that's okay, no one will tell. The kid will never know unless he goes to 23andMe and finds out that he has many brothers and sisters out there. And that's happening. There are limits to autonomy. What if someone has Alzheimer's disease, or someone is depressed or schizophrenia, and they say, no, I don't want your medicine because I believe the Martians made it? Do we say, okay, we won't give you the medication? When do we say, no, we're going to give the medication to you anyway? And these are difficult questions. And again, I'm laying out some of these challenges, and we can talk more about what we do. Benefits to whom? What if a patient with end-stage cancer wishes to be in a trial, but the results will benefit future patients, but not him or herself? Right now, we say, we have 12-year-old children who say, look, I'm going to die of cancer, I know that, but I'd like to be in the study because it may help other kids in the future, even though I'm not going to benefit. And right now, we say to that kid, no, you can't be in the study. Again, these are questions. What if the supply of a drug is limited? Who should get it? Who counts the most? Let's say for coronavirus, we come up with a treatment tomorrow, but we only have 100 doses or 1,000 doses. Who should get the doses of the treatment for coronavirus? Should it be just the healthcare workers? Should it be just the people who can afford it, the wealthy people? Should it be young people who could live the longest? Should it be people who are in positions of power? We should give it to the government leaders. Again, these are major questions that are very real. And we believe in doing no harm, but with many drugs, there are, of course, going to be harms of drugs, and many patients have serious disease. They may have cancer, they may have other diseases, and there are going to be risks. And the question is, when do the benefits outweigh the risks? And particularly with research, let's say I say, this is my new treatment for cancer, and I made it in my kitchen last night. I don't know the future effects. Or let's say it's a drug company made it, and it's a new compound. We don't know the potential future risks or the potential benefits because we've never tried it. So there are always going to be uncertainties in knowing what the risks and benefits are. And then justice. We believe in fairness to individuals and groups, particularly those who are vulnerable, poor people, refugees, often women in many societies, children. But justice can be thought of differently. So it can mean everyone gets the same. We call that communism. We could say those who need more get more, or we could say those who contribute more get more. And this is a major source of debate in the United States right now about health care. So Obamacare, President Obama's Affordable Care Act, the goal was to give a certain amount of health care to everyone, even if they can't afford it. There are Republicans, and President Trump says, no, if you put more money in, you should get more out. And if you don't put any money in, you shouldn't get anything, right? Because that's what's fair. If you didn't put any money in, why should we give you anything? Many of us disagree with that, but that is one belief. They say, well, that's what fair is. So again, one thing bioethics does is look at how we use these terms and realize that there may be different ways that we're interpreting them. Sometimes there may be disagreements because there are differences in fact. Is this dangerous or not? Other times, is it genetically modified food, is it dangerous or not? Other times, there are differences of how we interpret principles. And of course, these issues come up in doctor-patient relationships with children. They come up, as I said, if we have limited numbers of vaccines or treatment. But it can come up with organs. This is New Yorkers waiting online for organs. We have a shortage of organs in many countries, in the United States, in Jordan, et cetera. Iran is the one country in the world where it's legal to buy and sell kidneys. Where if you need a kidney, you can buy a kidney from someone who's willing to sell you a kidney. It's completely legal. And there are people in the United States who say we should do that in the U.S. Well, of course, the problem is that in the U.S., for instance, it would be wealthy people who would be buying kidneys from poor people. And we've done research that shows that poor people in Iran and other countries, when they sell their kidney, legal or not, they then regret it because they end up in bad health. They have medical problems. They thought that they would get $20,000 US and that would change their life, and it doesn't in the end. So again, there are questions of how we should distribute where goods in terms of healthcare where there's a shortage. Now, healthcare is an odd entity. So we don't say everyone deserves a fancy sports car, right? No country says everyone deserves a fancy sports car. But if you call up the police because your house is on fire in the United States, and I assume here, the fireman doesn't say, or if you say there's a robbery, the police doesn't say, well, what's your credit card? Do you have money to pay for the fireman to come to your house? The firemen just come to your house, right? So some things our societies say are a public good. Everyone deserves whatever it is. Other times we say, no, we're not going to give everyone some things, right? So where does healthcare fit? And how much healthcare? And again, these are ethical issues. And these are very political issues. Again, these are debates in Congress right now and in the United States. There are issues about the extremes of life. When does life start? And again, there are debates about this. Debates about abortion, for instance. Many people oppose abortion, many religions, saying that an embryo has the same moral value as a human life. This obviously is controversial. And at the end of life, there are questions, when should life end? So there are questions, should we give everyone a feeding tube? Should we have everyone should write in the United States an advanced care directive saying if I am unable to make decisions for myself, just give me fluid, don't do heroic measures to keep me alive. But there are questions, and many patients' families want things done for them even when we say it's futile. So we have people, a colleague jokes that we keep dead people alive in hospitals in the US right now because if we turn the machine off, they would die. They have no brain function. All that's keeping them alive is the machine that's breathing for them, the machine that's pumping their blood. So who would say, if you were the doctor, who would say, turn the machine off? Who would say, don't turn the machine off? Who's not sure? Who doesn't want to vote? Okay, so these are controversial issues, right? I mean, clearly if the person says, yes, please turn the machine off, that's one thing, but many people don't want to sign these things. People don't, I wrote a book, When Doctors Become Patients, as was mentioned. Many doctors say, look, I have cancer, I'm going to die. I know I should write an advance directive. I know I should write a will, but they don't write a will. Organ donation, I talked about aging. So we have increased longevity in many countries, in Jordan, in every country in the world. Basically, lifespan is going up. Actually went down last year in the US, but then went up again. There's more Alzheimer's disease, where people are living longer, but they have more healthcare needs. So healthcare costs go up. And there's a question, how much care should we give to elderly people versus young people? In the United States, a large percentage of people's care, their lifetime health care, is spent in the last year of life. If you ask people, let's say we spend $100,000 in the last year of life, or $50,000. If you ask the average person, we're going to give you $50,000. You can either spend it all in the last year of your life, or you can do it for anything else. Your child's education, your education. No one's going to say up front, yes, spend that on the last year. Who would say spend it on the last year? I won't ask you. But no one's going to say, yes, spend it on the last year of my life. People would invariably say, spend it on my children's education, my grandchildren's education, I want to go to vacation, whatever it is. I mentioned genetics. So the reason that genetics is in the news and poses issues is because the cost of sequencing a gene has gone down. Now, I apologize to some of my colleagues from KCC have heard some of this during the past week, but it was about 16 years ago that for the first time, we took someone's DNA and we looked at what it was. And so DNA is in all our cells, and we have DNA consists of a series of 4 molecules that we abbreviate ACTG, actinine, thymine, cysteine, guanine, and they are in a long letter that's 3 billion letters long, a long word that's 3 billion letters long. To give you an example, if this was a wall of books, this would have 3 billion letters, and we're 99.9% the same. If I pull out one book, that's the amount by which we differ. So in this whole wall of books, everything's the same, but by one book we differ, and that's what tells us that what color eyes you're going to have, what color hair you're going to have. It's going to tell us whether you're probably going to be tall or short, assuming that your diet's the same. It tells us what diseases you are more predisposed to have. It tells us how you may respond to different drugs if you get sick. Let's say we all get sick with a certain kind of disease or cancer. For some of us, this drug may make sense. For some of us, our genetics are going to tell us that that drug may make sense. So this is all in that one book. Well, the cost of figuring out what are the 3 billion letters and what's in the book for you, 16 years ago actually was $1 billion US. In the past 16 years, the cost of figuring out what's in that one book for you has gone from $1 billion to $100 million US to $10 million to $1 million to 100,000, and so now it's about $1,000. So that means many, many more people are finding out what's in that book for them that's going to tell them what diseases they have. Or what is your risk of Alzheimer's disease? What is your risk of getting a heart attack? Some people can smoke and never have a problem because of their genetics. Other people smoke and it's going to be really bad for them. Again, genetics are involved in this. Other factors as well. So genetics can help diagnose people, help in treatment, but most doctors I found don't feel prepared to talk about this. Many doctors went to med school before 16 years ago, and so genetics was playing a very much smaller role. Who should have your genetic information? I have this book with what diseases you're going to get. Is it okay if I give it to your boss? Who would say, yes, give it to my boss? Okay, who would say give it to all my friends? Who would say give it to my 16-year-old daughter? Again, how do we make these decisions? These are difficult ethical decisions. And again, coming back to the ethical principles, we need to figure out what are the benefits. Sometimes if it's a 30-year-old daughter, she may have a right to know and it may help her make decisions. Let's say it's for breast cancer, she could make sure she gets checked. What are the risks? And again, we don't want to just give this information to rich people and not give it to poor people. And we'll talk about why this is a problem. And again, this has become, and I realize I'm laying out a lot of issues, but I'll come to how these are similar and we can talk about them. And I should say, as mentioned, we have a whole master's program in this topic, but this is a new area, and so I'm laying out some of what's involved. A year and a half ago, Dr. He Jiankui in China announced that he was able to, we also now have, I should say, gene editing, a process called CRISPR. This was first, a lot of the work was done in yogurt, where it was found that yogurt, the bacteria in yogurt, did not get viruses. It turned out that the yogurt was able to take the DNA of the virus and get rid of it. It was able to edit out virus DNA. And so it was thought, and earlier researchers thought so too, that it seemed that bacteria and certain organisms had an ability to cut out DNA. Well, if you could cut out DNA or put other DNA, we could do the same thing. So we can now take a human embryo and we can put in genes for height. We could put in genes that'll give you a few extra IQ points, intelligence points. We could put in genes for blonde hair, blue eyes. We can put in genes for perfect pitch. We can put in genes for certain kinds of athletic ability. We can take genes out. If there's a gene for breast cancer that'll lead you to have breast cancer, we could take that out potentially, or change the gene. So Dr. He Jiankui actually did this. He altered the genes in an embryo. He put the embryo into a woman and produced children. So this can get rid of diseases. He is now in jail. Partly, he wanted to take out this much DNA, and he took out this much DNA. So he took out too much, so he didn't perfect it. He thought he would win the Nobel Prize. He should have done more research on animals first, and there are other problems we can talk about. But we also have a technique that's widely done throughout the United States and here in Jordan as well, called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, where when an egg meets a sperm, it forms an embryo of one cell that then splits and forms 2 cells and 4 cells and 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and eventually ends up being each of you. But when it's a bunch of cells, we can take out, we're taking out one of the cells of an embryo, and we can diagnose it for hundreds of things. We can say that if, let's say, a couple undergoing IVF make 8 embryos, we could say these 4 will be boys, these 4 will be girls. These 3 have a gene associated with breast cancer or another disease, these don't. And so we're able to do this. And this raises questions because many people are concerned about eugenics, about, for instance, we have wealthy people now in the United States who are at risk of breast cancer who are paying to get rid of the breast cancer gene from their kids. So their children and grandchildren will not have breast cancer, even though they have breast cancer, their mother has breast cancer. So breast cancer, which now unfortunately affects both wealthy people and poor people, is becoming a disease just of more of poor people, because wealthy people can get rid of the gene. And again, that raises questions about inequity, and many of us in bioethics are concerned that that means that in the future there may be less money spent for research on breast cancer, or less money spent for treatment on breast cancer if it's just a disease of poor people, or increasingly a disease of poor people. I wrote about this in my book, Designing Babies. We also have in the U.S., we have abilities to, with IVF, we are one of the countries where people buy and sell eggs, buy and sell sperm, buy and sell embryos, rent wombs. So some of my colleagues saw this the other day, but this is one website. You can check this out at home, the eggdonor.com. There are hundreds of websites like this, and you can choose here. Popular searches are Caucasian egg donors, Chinese egg donors, I'm sorry for the small size, Hispanic, Japanese, and at the bottom it has Jewish egg donors, Islamic egg donors, other egg donors. So you can now choose an Islamic egg donor. Now, it says it's an Islamic egg donor. And I'm reminded there was and I mentioned this the other day, George Bernard Shaw was a great playwright, wrote Pygmalion that became the movie My Fair Lady. He once got a letter from a very attractive Spanish actress and said, Mr. Shaw, just think if we got married, our children would have my looks and your brains. And he wrote back and said, yes, but imagine if they have my looks and your brains. So you don't know with genetics what you're getting. Just because someone may be have certain traits, they may not be what you get. This is another site. This is called egg-donors.com. Not very creative on the names. And here there are drop-down menus. Again, you can choose race, skin color, eye color, hair color, education, availability, height, etc. The prices go up with your SAT scores, which are scores you take to get into college. For the research I did for Designing Babies, one doctor told me that he had a patient who said, I want a Harvard egg. And the doctor said, well, I have an egg from another Ivy League school. I won't mention which one. And the patient said, no, it has to be a Harvard egg. So again, what are we buying, and are we promoting eugenics? Is this okay? And what are the problems with this? This is now completely legal in the United States. If you're in the United States today, anyone here can start an egg donor agency. You advertise to get people to say they're going to donate. You advertise to say you have these eggs for sale. As I spoke this earlier this week, many of these women don't know what they're getting themselves into. They're 18 years old. They think they're going to get $50,000. Turns out they find out that they're at risk of different diseases because they have screening done. There's a risk of medical problems from having the hormones done to make you produce more eggs, etc. There's another website showing blondes, brunettes, and again, I'll let you draw your own decisions, but they look like, I think they look like prostitutes. So again, what's being sold? This is drari.com. So the concern here is eugenics. In the United States, unfortunately, eugenics started before it got to Nazi Germany in the 1920s. This is from Kansas. There were eugenic societies. This is the American Eugenics Society from Topeka, Kansas. And at the country fair, there'd be a prize for the farmer with the biggest pig, the farmer with the biggest tomato, the farmer with the biggest sheep, the farmer with the biggest pumpkin, and you got an award if you had the best all-American genealogy. And this is in the 1920s when you had immigrants to the United States coming from Southern Europe, from Eastern Europe, as opposed to being from England and France. And so these were from England and France. You had white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and they didn't like that you had other immigrants coming in, and they wanted to preserve the American genome. And of course, Hitler then took this and killed people who were Romanian, who were gay, who had disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So genetics can help in many ways. It can help us get rid of diseases, but there are also uncertainties. For most people, genetics at the moment do not provide clinically useful information. Probably about 5% of people have something among people who, except for cancer, which is different because genetics we're finding is very helpful in treatment and diagnosis of cancer and will increasingly be. For everyone else, very few people have a bad gene out there, because if there was a bad gene that killed people when they're young, that person wouldn't have kids and the gene wouldn't spread. But for about 5% of people, probably there are very clinically useful things that have been given. For many conditions, the old debate about whether certain traits are nature versus nurture, the answer is both, that many traits are partly genetic and partly not. So intelligence is half genetic and half not. It's probably many, many genes involved. So just because you have a gene doesn't mean you'll get a disease. They could be useful genetic tests for carrier status, for figuring out your drugs, or figuring out your ancestry. But historically, there have been many studies that say, I'm going to look at who has a certain disease. Let's say this half of the room has a certain disease, diabetes, this half does not. I'm going to look at all 3 billion letters, and I'm going to find some letter that this half of the room has that this doesn't. And I'll say, that's the letter that causes diabetes. Well, it doesn't. It's just chance. I'm sure if I look at this half of the room and this half of the room, I would find one of these 3 billion letters that this side has that this doesn't. I'm going to call it the left side of the auditorium gene. That's a joke. In other words, so there have been lots of studies that have tried to look for genes and where it ends up that it worked in that particular sample but not another sample. There are many genes that we don't understand. There have variants of uncertain significance, we say. And we have our work on genetics tends to be based on sick people, people with disease. We have very little information on the genetics of the population at large. And there's a lot of examples when we look at patients with a particular cancer, we find a gene or a particular disease, and then we go and we say that must be the thing that is killing them. We go in the population, we find that gene among people who are perfectly healthy. So it's our knowledge is still in its infancy. Many people have serious mutations and no symptoms. There may be many genes and environmental factors involved. Electronic medical records and artificial intelligence. So in the United States now, most doctors have your records on their computer, not written by hand. In many countries, this is increasingly the case. It can help with research, help with the system saying, look, your patient hasn't had their prescription renewed, or you need to check this test again. But in the United States, we have a law that called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act that protects you from having your health insurance company saying, based on your genetics, we're not going to cover you. But the law does not cover disability insurance, long-term care insurance, life insurance. So those other insurance companies can say, what are your genetics? Oh, you have this gene. We're not going to cover you for life insurance or disability insurance. And that's legal for them right now. The problem is with electronic medical records, much of the data is inaccurate. People are tired. How many people have made a mistake while typing something in their phone? Right? So it's what we do. Some hospitals are selling the patient data for money to companies. 23andMe now has the DNA of roughly 3 million people in the United States. In the United States, you pay $500, you find out your genetics. 23andMe takes that collection of 3 million people's DNA and is selling it for $60 million to different drug companies. So any drug company that wants to buy the data could buy it for $60 million. That's how they're making money. But then, of course, that means a drug company has all your genetic information and often everything else about you, and there could be discrimination. Your boss can say, do you have certain genes? For instance, a school can say, if you want to apply to Columbia or Harvard, Columbia wouldn't, of course, but they could say, well, what are your genes? Do you have certain genes for intelligence, or do you have certain genes associated with autism? And based on that, we're going to decide whether to admit you or not, for instance. And right now, that's completely legal for an educational institution to do that. We also have telemedicine, where the leading hospital system in California is Kaiser Permanente. half of their visits are now done via the internet, where patients don't go to see the doctor looks at them through Skype or Zoom or FaceTime and finds out how you're doing. We also have wearables, Apple Watches, lots of information. This is great. Can help with prevention, diagnosis, treatment, surveillance, research, education. It can help in rural areas. If we don't have a skilled surgeon or radiologist in a rural area, we can do it all by internet. It's great. It can be around the clock. We can see patients at home. But there's a lot of information. Who's going to get that information? I was asked recently by the IEEE, which is the International Electrical Engineering and Electronic people. Any plug you plug in from your computer has IEEE standard. Well, they asked me to consult with them about a month ago because we now have digital pills. We have pills with a computer chip. So you could take the pill and a little alarm goes off when it hits your stomach, and that means you've taken the pill. Well, this is great if you have your elderly parents at home and they're forgetful, and you could find out, Mom took the pill today, or Mom, you didn't take your pill today. I see it on the computer. But now I'm going to sell the data. So now I have the data of who forgets their pills. And in the United States, we have a lot of scams, right? We have people calling up elderly people. This is the Internal Revenue Service. We need your credit card right away. And the person's sort of out of it and they give it. So we now have a record of we're now selling information of who forgets to take their medication. Well, that's valuable data to someone. So again, who has this? Government, researchers, et cetera, raises questions. Where will the records be stored? Who will see them? Who owns them? Will they be shared? Will they be hacked? Et cetera. What do you tell patients? There's a big debate. When you go to the hospital now, some of your blood is kept, and every hospital in America, and I'm sure in other countries as well, perhaps Jordan, don't know the details here, but is trying to build a biobank where they have the DNA of every patient who walks in the door. And they want to use that for all kinds of things and sell it, et cetera. Who thinks that's good? Who thinks that's bad? Who's not sure? Okay, so it raises lots of questions. Who should have access? What should the information be? When you should say no? These are all important ethical issues that we are working on deciding. Again, with the computer issues, people's literacy varies. This may help wealthy people more than others, et cetera. There's need for research on this. Is it better or worse care? What parts are better or worse? How do, again, we weigh the risks and benefits, et cetera? And then just in research in general, when to use a placebo? How much do you pay people? We have, for many medical studies now, 45-page consent forms. Who here has, in the past year, scrolled down and clicked, I accept, online without understanding it? Okay. So is that informed consent? You basically have often said, do whatever you want with my data. Right? People can now sell your data, et cetera, make money off your data, off of what you Googled, et cetera. So informed consent is a big issue. We need a lot of work on this to make it better. How should we make these decisions, or stem cells, et cetera? So I can lay out more issues, but I realize there's a lot of issues I've covered. I want to come back to, though, the way we deal with these is by thinking, again, we come back to basic ethical questions. What are people's rights? Who has rights in a situation, and what are those rights? So if it's my DNA, my blood sample, I should have a say in what happens to it. On the other hand, and there are risks and benefits, sometimes we have to weigh those. There may be, if everyone said, no, I don't want to share my DNA, there would not be much medical research that would help people. So we believe you need to share a certain amount of data about all of us to help scientists develop treatments that can help all of us. But we also want to, so there's benefit. We want to respect people's autonomy. We want to decrease the risk. So we want to say, no, we're going to get the benefit. We want to avoid people being taken advantage of. We want to avoid the data being sold in a way that can harm you. And we want to let you know what's happening and give you choices. And we want to make sure that it's not set up so it's going to help poor people and help rich people take advantage of poor people. So again, these are basic kind of ethical principles that we come back to. Laws are often involved. Sometimes there are laws. Many of these technologies have developed so fast that we don't yet have laws to deal with them. And that's why we have bioethics to help think through the issues of what should we be doing. So there are issues. Bioethics as a field can help address these. Research is important. Policies are needed in hospitals and governments by WHO and others. And there's a need to educate people, but also the public. And I think that this is why I've been working in this field and giving lectures, because I think that all of us need to understand these issues. Because there will be, in the United States, there are politicians who are saying various things that may or may not be right. We may agree or disagree, but we need to be educated enough to know what's involved. That before we say Facebook can do whatever they want with our data, no, there shouldn't be no laws about Facebook or Google. We need to think through what are the risks, right? What are our rights? What is going to avoid having the rich get richer and the poor getting poor? How do we at least, it's always going to be a difference, but how do we at least prevent people from being exploited in ways that can be avoided? So those are basic issues in bioethics. I'd be happy to answer questions. I should say we have individual courses. We have online on our website. If you just go to Columbia Bioethics, we have many, many free videos of lectures that leading bioethicists in the world and at Columbia and elsewhere have given. We also have courses. You can take one course. We can do a certificate of 4 courses, a whole master's program. All our courses are online and face-to-face. So we have people who do a whole online program, people from all over the world doing this. And people also contact us with questions, and we're happy to help. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for coming. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
Mahmoud Sarhan, futility versus economy. You know, futility can be defined in the United States actually at certain level of interference, physician interference and medication. Some medication are affordable for people, while futility and economics is different here in Jordan and maybe different, let's say, in Pakistan or Bangladesh or whatever it is. You know, how we really think of where to put the line, because patients typically want everything be done. And physicians also got enthusiastic. They have connection with the patient. They want to give everything possible. And sometimes this is not affordable for the country. That's a real difficulty. Can you comment on this, please?
Yes, it's a very important issue and a very sensitive one. So when a few years ago, when President Obama was running for president against Sarah Palin and John McCain, and he said he wanted to get doctors to provide funding to doctors that they would be able to bill for their time in talking to patients about making end-of-life decisions, so patients could make good end-of-life decisions and not have heroic measures done when it's not going to work. And Sarah Palin said, quote, "They're creating death panels to get rid of grandma." That, in other words, this is just a way of getting rid of grandma, right? So there's a balance between, you're absolutely right, that if you did not spend as much money on end-of-life care for expensive procedures when the person's never going to recover, where it's futile, we would save money. And yet, that needs to be conveyed in a way that makes it clear that it's not about saving money. In other words, the goal is because, I mean, you could argue different ways. I mean, in fact, you don't want, no one here would say, yes, pull the plug on me to save money. If you say, though, the person, in fact, is suffering, they're never, you know, they are often suffering, right? They are comatose, they're never going to wake up. This is not a quality of life that they would have wanted. So I think if you explain to people that way, people understand that. If you say the hospital wants to save money, so we're going to pull the plug, no one's going to say yes to that. That is an effect. I don't think that should be the motive. Money is a difficult thing to talk about. There's a famous American writer, Tom Wolfe, who wrote Bonfire of the Vanities, for instance. It became a movie. And I once talked with him, and he said, you know, in America, there used to be one taboo that no one would talk about, and that was sex. Now, people talk about sex. No one cares who's sleeping with who. The one taboo now is money. And no one knows, probably people don't know what you don't know what your friend's earning, right? People don't really know, how did she afford that, right? How much money do they have in the bank? probably no one here shouldn't say no, but we don't know how much money our friends have in the bank, right? We don't talk about it. And so money is a delicate topic. And again, I think this speaks to understanding the cultural issues, the psychological issues, the social issues, but we need to be able to communicate better about death and dying. And we've not done a good job, and I don't think we've trained doctors, at least not in the United States, to deal with that better. And that's one of the things we're trying to do, is to find ways to have doctors and patients and nurses and others, chaplains, et cetera, spiritual counselors, talk about death and dying, which I think would help. Yes? I think there's a mic.
Thank you. Thank you for an excellent expose on bioethics. I'm Zabi. I work for the Interaction Council, which is a club of former heads of state who are trying to make the world a better place for future generations. The Interaction Council was responsible for publishing the Universal Declaration of Human Responsibility back in 1983. And now we're in the process of revising and updating this Universal Declaration of Human Responsibility, taking on board questions concerning bioethics.
Good.
One of the issues that we have had difficulty with is identifying the audience that we should address in this context. When you talk about environmental issues or political issues or ethical issues, often in the past we have managed to identify our target audience, the group. When we're talking about bioethics, we have been struggling to identify the clear audience. How can you help us with that in terms of identifying whom to address when it comes to bioethics practice?
Thank you. Well, it's a great question. It sounds like, I don't know of your group, but it sounds like you're doing great work, and so thank you for that. I would ask, so I think if you ask me who needs input on bioethics, I would say everyone. I think patients, their families, and that means everyone, because everyone is or will be a patient or a family member of a patient, the public, policymakers, industry. 20% of the US economy is in healthcare. So to give you an example. So I think it needs to be very, very broad. But I assume you've thought of that, but think there are issues, challenges that I'm wondering what I would also, and I'd be happy to talk with you about this afterwards or communicate with you afterwards, but where do you see the challenges in that, or why not say everyone? And why would bioethics be different than, say, the environment? I don't mean to challenge you, but I'm just curious.
Well, I think the problem with bioethics is that we've identified a multitude of stakeholders. Unlike issues which were more confined to certain decision-making organizations or stakeholders. With bioethics, besides 20 years, almost 30 years have passed since the first Declaration of Human Responsibility was published. So now, we are just essentially wondering, do we address decision makers, politicians, the medical community, patients, the pharmaceutical companies?
Thank you. I would say they all need to be addressed. And of course, as you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, which Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, helped push, included health as a human right. All countries, quote, signed on as parties. The US government did not ratify it in Congress. And similarly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the Child, I think there's only 2 countries that did not ratify it. One was the United States, and the other was, I want to say, Albania or somewhere, so not in good company. So I think one issue is what it means. That's a whole other topic, but I think that everyone needs to be aware of these issues and incorporate them. And the reason bioethics exists is because biotechnology has gone like this. Electronic technology has gone like this. Everyone in this room, your health data is known by many, many people whom you don't even know. Personal information about you is known by many, many people you don't know. Whether you've had a sexually transmitted disease, how much you smoke, whether you've had an abortion, and I mean, some of this applies more in the US than it does here in Jordan. What diseases you're at risk for, whether or not you have a genetic disease that may affect your daughter's ability to get married, right? So this is information that is in electronic records that someone has, and this now it's like saying, who's not affected by the internet? I would say, if you come up with guidelines on the internet, who should this be addressed? I think you would say everyone. And so I think similarly here, everyone needs to be aware of their rights and responsibilities, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. There's a question back there, yes. Just if you don't mind waiting for the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
So they're both related to medical education. So the first one is
Do you just want to identify yourself?
Oh, yeah, sorry. My name's Gabby. I'm an aspiring physician, and I work for a nonprofit here in Jordan, which is why I'm particularly interested in how bioethics is incorporated into medical education. And you've talked about kind of the accelerating rate of biotechnology and how a lot of physicians now weren't trained in the technologies that currently exist. So I was wondering if you could talk to how we're training physicians to be ready to handle grappling with issues with technologies that they weren't taught about, and kind of what skills they need to have in order to be able to handle those challenges and questions that they'll run into. And then my second question is, I know that for a lot of medical students, international health work is something that they're interested in. A lot of students do, and oftentimes they go to countries in the global south or countries with fewer resources and have the ability to participate in procedures that they wouldn't in the US. And I was wondering, kind of from your perspective, how do you view that from the perspective of non-maleficence and beneficence? So is it better to have some sort of care versus none at all, even though they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do those procedures in other contexts?
Great, well, great questions, thank you. So many of us have been working to increase the presence of bioethics in medical education. I think it's increasing, but it's still a long ways to go. I think there's still a bias in many medical schools that science is what's important. In fact, in the future, algorithms and AI will be doing a lot of what doctors now do. When I went to med school, I used to have to learn how to read an EKG. No one needs to learn how to do read an EKG because it's all done by machines now. When you have an electrocardiogram, it says you have heart attack or not, or it reads it for you. So increasingly, it's going to be these human issues. The human side of practice is going to be increasingly important. So I think we still need to do more to educate people. That's why we actually have in our master's program many, many physicians who are looking to get training in bioethics so they could help teach us to the next generation. In terms of many medical students working in the developing world, I think this could be an enormously important experience for them for learning about healthcare in the developing world. That being said, they need to be in positions in which they are not doing things that they're not competent to do. So you don't want to send in a medical student to do surgery if they don't know how to do surgery, right? I mean, or they took, a course in surgery and, well, it's better to have a medical student do it than no one do it. That's wrong. So in terms of, you need to find what they are good at doing. In other words, they could presumably interview patients. They could help if patients are in an emergency room, say, with a translator, they can figure out who has a severe medical problem. For instance, they could be trained to do certain procedures, draw blood, take vital signs, take blood pressure, pulse, heart rate, things like that. So I think the key thing is to find out how their skills that they do have, that they are competent in, can help without putting anyone at risk. Yes, the woman over here. Just wait for the mic if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very timely and much needed topic. My name is Mailman. I'm Jordanian Armenian. I'm completely outside the medical field. I'm into human security and peace, but nevertheless, I have two key questions. I hope it's relevant to your presentation. Is that first, how can you balance between bioethics and what we call the vicious partnership between research and business? because, I mean, bioethics should serve the welfare of human beings. However, researchers are so much desperate to get any kind of funding to go on with their research, and nevertheless, they are at the mercy of the business people who care, number one, with how much money will be the outcome of the research. How can you make the balance between the two? My second question is that being in Jordan, it's very relevant when you talk about how to improve to overcome bad genes and how to improve the good genes in human beings. But you know, we have a crucial issue which I think it's really tackled, which has not only bioethics relevance but also cultural sensitivity. It's the issue of related genes. You know, in this part of the world, we have a lot of related genes, and myself being a member of the General Assembly for Disabilities, unfortunately, even we cannot address the audience about the repercussions of related genes and whether there is a way of overcoming the repercussions of related genes, which means that among the family members. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. So the issue of industry being involved in research is very important. One key issue that I did not discuss, I had to choose, I know it shows probably too many topics, but is conflicts of interest. So you want to, again, one of the principles of bioethics is to minimize the risk. So one could say, let's not have any industry money in research. That's one option. The counter-argument for that is that there may be less incentive to pursue treatments and cures. In other words, by having profit, look at communism, right? So it kind of killed innovation, right? So if people feel, gee, if I discover this, I'm going to get something, it may motivate them. Good or bad, I think just human nature, there's that argument at least. I agree with you. I think a problem has been, so on the one hand, industry has produced many treatments, many of us, I'm sure, on medications of some kind that were developed first on patent by a drug company that made a profit off them. The law says, they then become generic. The problem, I would say, is there are abuses in the system. So drug companies have done many good things. At times, they've abused things. So the worst example recently, of course, is Purdue Pharmaceuticals making opioids in the United States, where the data suggests, and this is according to what journalists have written, that they knew that these drugs were much more addicting than they were, but they said, we're not going to discuss that. We're going to say that OxyContin is less addicting. And it was based on one publication that was actually an abstract, not a full published manuscript, that was sort of a letter to the editor of a journal. And so they knew that it was more addicting than that, but they lied about it. So you want to avoid that kind of issue. So I think that's why we have research ethics committees who look at very carefully at research that's being done to make sure that patients are well informed, to make sure risks are minimized. Even going back to Nuremberg, there's a favorable risk-benefit ratio, that the benefits outweigh the risks. So I think the reality is, in a capitalistic system, which is the system we live in, we want to at least minimize the risk, having transparency. It's often an uphill battle. I think we need more laws. I personally, in the current state of the United States politically, I don't think there's going to be, this is a major issue at the moment actually, is, what do we do with drug company prices? We now have drugs that cost $2 million US per patient. $2 million US per patient. Well, we can't afford that. So this is a systemic issue that we as a society need to take on. If every voter said, this is outrageous, I'm going to vote against any politician who supports this, we'd get rid of it. Drug companies have arranged with Congress that Medicare in the United States cannot negotiate with drug companies. That is, I think, ethically wrong, because as a result, U.S. citizens pay much more for drugs than any patients anywhere else in the world. So I think there are things that could be done without getting rid of the system. Yes, just wait for the mic if you don't mind. You had your hand up too, I think. Yes, okay, we'll come to you next.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It's
and just introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name is Zaina. I'm a theory of knowledge educator at a school here in Amman.
Great.
And I just thought it was very interesting because we are currently, there is a new, well, it's been a few years now, theory of knowledge is a core subject in the IB. And these are the kinds of topics that we discuss. So in comment to...
Just say what the IB is?
Yes, sorry, the International Baccalaureate. It's a curriculum. And it's really interesting because, for example, we are conducting a seminar soon, and the title is The Role of Ethics in the Creation of Knowledge. To what extent does ethics either hinder or advance the creation of knowledge? So I actually wanted to ask you, do you think that, to any extent, that ethical limitations or bioethics may cause, at some point, limitations to the creation of knowledge, considering in the past, of course, I'm not saying that's my position, I'm just coming at it from an epistemological kind of point of view, just that in the past, for example, when they had the Milgram experiment, and they had the Stanford Prison experiment, and they had all these different unethical, what we consider unethical experiments now, a lot was gained in terms of understanding the human mind, understanding what the human mind does under pressure, all these kinds of things. So it's just, from your perspective, is there a point in time where it's possible that ethics, the bioethics, or maybe even just ethical limitations may hinder the creation of knowledge?
So I gave a talk this week on forbidden knowledge, which is on YouTube, so you might want to look at this. I would say the following, that to advance society, to advance social good, to advance the well-being of all people, to advance the planet, what we need is not just knowledge, but we need knowledge and respect for people. We need knowledge and helping people. So if I come up with a knowledge, advancing knowledge, I just developed something, if I spray this once, you will all die. What a great thing. I've advanced knowledge. I developed this thing, I spray this, you'll all die. Thank God I advanced knowledge. Well, obviously that's not good. Why is that not good? Because what we need as a society is not just the creation of knowledge. That's one goal. I believe in creation of knowledge. I'm a professor at Columbia. I also believe in social good. I believe that we shouldn't have a society, we shouldn't where someone can just go harming people, Right, so let's say the Nazis figured out how long it takes for you to die in the cold. They created knowledge. Who thinks that's good that they figured that out the way they did? Right, by taking people, I want to find out how long it takes for people to starve to death, so I'm going to starve you all to death and see how long it takes for you to die. I mean, I'm advancing knowledge, so clearly we should have values beyond just advancing knowledge, but helping people, not hurting people, promoting a better society, etc. Yes, actually, yes, yeah, I'm sorry. You had your hand up earlier.
My name is Haneen. I'm a biomedical engineering student.
Great.
And my question is related to the data that you were talking about and the genomic data that is PRIV and the privacy related to that. What if such data is used to run simulation in AI and deep learning models that help us and prevent us actually from going to the other side of using experiments that are inhumane, like the freezing of the soldiers and so on and so forth. So they're actually helping pharmaceutical companies into advancing the human knowledge, but at the same time, they're not harming other people. What's the take of ethics on that?
So I would say, so absolutely, AI is going to help us in all kinds of ways. Think about when you search Google. You get what you want, right? You search in something amazing. How far is it from here to the W Hotel? Or whatever, right? You type it and boom, it tells you, right? That's all because of AI. GPS, how long is it going to take for me to drive right now to the restaurant, drive home? Or how long is it going to take me to drive here from wherever you're coming from before? You punch it in and it says it's going to take 15 minutes or an hour and a half, and you can plan accordingly. That's all through AI. So AI, as in addition to other kinds of reading the EKG, right? So this way, immediately when you have the EKG done, you don't have to wait for a doctor to read it, which could take a few hours. The computer says, no heart attack or heart attack. So AI has a lot of good. Technology can be used for good or bad. It's how we use it. So AI could absolutely be used for good. It can help find cures. It can help with discovering treatments, finding things in genes. You want to make sure that you minimize the risks, that you don't have everyone's DNA out there online, so you can just get everyone's DNA and, oh, is that interesting that the woman who is the biomedical engineer, she has the risk of this and that, and I don't want that person working for me. And I should say, this discrimination could be subtle. I've had people in the work I did for my book, Am I My Genes, Confronting Fate and Family Secrets in the Age of Genetic Testing, they told me, for instance, that they tested positive for the breast cancer gene. They mentioned to a coworker, I tested positive for that gene. The next thing they knew, people came up to them at work and said, how are you? The next thing they knew, it was assumed that when the boss, the head of the division, retired, that this person would become the boss, would become the head of the division. She was passed over. She wasn't fired, but she just passed over. Well, she thinks it's because there was discrimination. Now, there's age discrimination in America, right? There's just male chauvinism, right? I mean, every study shows that, there are fewer women who are CEOs, there are fewer women who are fill in the blank of, college professors, and there are studies that show that if you take the CVs of people, the studies have shown this, and you just change the name from a woman to a man, and you send them to hiring people, which would you hire? Men are going to be hired more than the women. Even if it's the same exact CV in the experiment, all we did was change the gender of the person. So there is discrimination. That's what we want to reduce. You want to make sure that maybe we don't have identifying information on it, or you can't identify the person. Now, there are challenges because DNA is inherently identifying, right? So you need to find ways to encrypt information. It can be done, but one needs to be careful. Yes, this woman here in the gray.
Checking my notes real quick.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay, my name is Shahla. I'm running a software company. My interest in the talk comes primarily from being obsessed about data privacy. So just to give you a tiny glimpse, I haven't been on any social media for 10 years. I've never had Snapchat or Instagram or etc. So it's that much of an obsession.
And you survived.
Yeah, I think I survived better. So my question is, it sounds like just from scanning briefly the open-ended questions that you kind of listed throughout your talk, that if I were to segment the interest groups or stakeholders involved in the discussion, it would be individual good taking precedence or priority versus the greater good versus maybe a subgroup's good, whether that's rich people or a certain age group or geo, which is it's a very sophisticated discussion to be having. I don't think it's easy. Most of your questions that you asked, would you not, do you not know? In most cases, I answered, I wouldn't know. My question is, from the discussions that are happening right now, at least in the States, do you feel that there's a priority that's leaning towards one of these three segments more than the other? And is there an attempt to sync up at least the greater good with the individual good?
So it's a great question. So I think that from a bioethical perspective, part of what we do is figure out what should be the case, right? So we want to avoid companies doing things for their profit that are going to harm people. We want to figure out what is individual good, what you want to almost write it all out, right? Make columns. Okay, what's the greater good? What's the individual good? What's the larger social or scientific benefit? What are the risks to whom, et cetera? And then look at what would take precedence. But the key thing is, one, you want to make sure that you look at all the issues, that you don't say, that you don't leave certain factors out. And that has been a major problem. So to give you an example, there are deaf people in the United States, deaf couples where the man and the woman are deaf, and they want to have a deaf child. And and they go to the doctor and say, please give us a deaf child. And some doctors say yes. There are dwarf parents where they're both dwarfs, and they say, we want to have a dwarf child. The doctor says, well, I respect autonomy. That's what the parents want. I'm going to make money off it. So sure. What are they missing? And the parents say, look, we think there's nothing wrong with being deaf. We think there's nothing wrong with being a dwarf. So you could say, well, according to them, there's no risk, there's benefit. Well, something's missing. What's missing? the rights of the unborn child, right? So you want to think through, okay, there are rights. Whose rights? There's the rights of the doctor. Who are all the parties, right? What are the risks? And then who should make the decision? Right? The problem is that the decision's being made for the unborn child. You're going to be born deaf or dwarf. Well, I don't want to speak for, there's this whole disabilities advocacy issue here, but I would say that that there's the rights of the unborn child that are important. So part of the reason you go through these is to make sure you're not leaving something out, that I'm going to make benefit off this. I'm going to get the Nobel Prize by discovering how long it takes people to starve to death. There's social good. Well, I'm going to benefit. Well, there's also risk to people, right? And the societal benefit, I may say. And certain things are standard. So we generally don't let social benefit outweigh individual risk. We don't say, we're going to kill you because it's going to help society, right? I mean,
sorry,
except for prison.
this segues into a very quick follow-up question. Who sits on these committees, boards, decision-making bodies? Because to me, it sounds like the underlying discussion is very much philosophical, because there's still the subjectivity of what is good, whether it's for individuals, social, whatever, right?
So one, we come up with guidelines. Every institute that does research, every hospital, every university needs a research ethics committee. We have people from research ethics committees here, from KCC actually. Columbia has 7 such bodies. There is some oversight from the government. They have problems. I wrote a book called The Ethics Police with a question mark. Is it looking at how they actually make decisions? Hospitals have clinical ethics committee meetings, and they try to follow guidelines. Professional associations, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, et cetera, come up with guidelines. But again, all of us need to be aware of what's going on. If you're in a hospital, any of you could volunteer to be on the hospital ethics committee. There's a huge need for people who are not doctors, who are not in this world, to be part of this, to say, I'd like to be on the hospital ethics committee, the hospital research ethics committee, and find out, what are you doing? And, I'm willing to be educated on how you operate. So these are all important issues. Microsoft recently formed a research ethics committee. I don't know if I've heard Facebook now has an ethicist. So there's a lot of corporations are now hiring ethicists. Now again, how are they doing it? How independent are they? These are all issues. But I think the more we all are all educated, the better we'll be.
Last one, I promise. Very quick one. Do you feel that data sharing, or even consideration of how data is being used in this field, is transcending borders? Or is
what borders?
Is it transcending borders geographically? Like, do we think about humankind in this discussion, or is it very much American?
No, we should think about the planet. Lord knows, anything you do here is going to be affecting other people. We live in a global society, so I think we do need to think not just, my little turf, but the rest of the world. Just a few hands, then I'll come back. Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Klitzman, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A section since we're running a bit out of time. But if anybody...
last question.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. You get the comment.
So thank you very much. My name is Maysel Husseini. I'm a physician at King Hussein Cancer Center and the chair of the Institutional Review Board, which is, in other words, the Research Ethics Committee at the center. And we have the privilege actually to arrange and invite Dr. Klitzman into the center. So he gave us a wonderful 2-day workshop. And actually the essence of the workshop was somehow different. So we chose 4 of his books: The Ethics Police, Am I My Genes, Designing Babies, and When Doctors Become Patients. And what really struck us while reading the books, that we could relate so much into everything that was written. So the same issues that were discussed with Am I My Genes, exactly, we're facing the same issues. And actually, my friend here, Amal Omari, because we work together, through a research on BRCA gene in high-risk breast cancer patients, the same questions, the same issues that were discussed in the book, we had exactly the same issues. So the ethical issues are actually the same. We are all human. Perhaps we might, until we read the books, we thought that we have more difficulties in regulating or accepting genetic testing as part of the clinical care or as part of research, but actually after reading the books, the same issues. So we have some diseases like breast carcinoma, like malignant tumor in the eye of children, retinoblastoma, and the same issues arose, whether in the book, whether in the western part of the globe or whether here. And we do have actually a very active research ethics committee at King Hussein Cancer Center. Actually, the Jordanian law mandates the presence of a research ethics committee in any institution that runs clinical trials. So this is what is mandated. Now, there are other types of research, especially when it comes to psychosocial research, unfortunately, that are not as well regulated in Jordan. But we've been working together with my other friend, Rawan Ibrahim, and the UNICEF on laying the ground for a national psychosocial research ethics committee. The problems are the same, the issues are the same, the concerns are the same.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. I answered only the one of your two questions.
And this is something, it's a taboo. We don't discuss it because cultural sensitivity should be
Yes, I agree.
number one, because I work with these activities as well.
Yes.
And I've seen parents completely responsible that they have given badges to their children which they could have avoided.
So,
It's exactly, yes, absolutely.
yes, I'll answer your question. Yes, there's an easy way to do it. Yes. So, yeah, I understand. If I can answer that.
Sure.
No, and I realize I only answered the first of your two questions. I apologize for that when you asked earlier. There are other communities that have a lot of, I'll say, intermarriage. And what some have done is they've arranged for confidential screening of a couple who are about to get married, and they do genetic screening, and they look, are they both carriers for a disease? Well, there's two answers. Are both carriers for a disease such that their children are at risk? And the confidential service will say, you two should not get married. They don't say what the disease is. They don't say the man's side, the woman's side. They say, go find other people. Other communities have done this. Happy to talk to you about it. That's one. The second is that there's pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So in the United States, there are people who we're both carriers, say, for cystic fibrosis. Me and if I'm having a child with a woman, we can screen embryos, and we can say these embryos as I talked about earlier, these embryos have cystic fibrosis, these don't. We're just going to use the embryos that don't have the cystic fibrosis. So there are absolutely ways that in a community in which there is intermarriage, you can prevent the transmission of diseases that are disabling that we know about.
So can I
Yes.
interject? This is exactly what I was saying. So with retinoblastoma, the parents actually, when we did the genetic analysis for the parents and the child who is affected with retinoblastoma, because the child should have inherited in most of the times the faulty gene from one of the parents. So when we had the test, we did the test, we could not disclose the results for the family because of the familial implications. Yes? Cultural sensitivity. But again, I don't know if you read his books. It's exactly the same. This is what I'm alluding to. So the same social issues. Everybody would not like to be labeled as a family with predisposition to breast carcinoma because of fear that nobody would marry their girls.
Yes. So just to clarify too, thank you, Mesa, for that. So cultural sensitivity is crucial. So you need to factor in cultural sensitivity in all these issues. I tried to show how it's one thing to have the principles, but they get interpreted and applied in different specific situations. I said, you remember, in the beginning there were 4 principles, right? Seems easy. But when you apply it to a different situation, like this issue here earlier, you know, what do you do, or these situations we've been talking about, you need to weigh in any particular culture what the risks are, what the benefits. You need to factor in risk of not getting married. That's a risk. So you need to put that on the list of risks and factor it in. So actually, cultural sensitivity is crucial. Thank you.